há coisas que só acontecem ao Botafogo. In the 2023 Campeonato Brasileiro Série A, Botafogo had won 15 of their first 19 league games, establishing a 13-point lead at the top of the table. An effort that made it look as if Botafogo was about to cruise to their first Brasileiro title since 1995. But in the second half of the season, over the course of 19 games, these were their results. 3 wins, 8 draws, 8 losses.
Excuse me?
But how exactly did Botafogo, a team that looked so dominant in the first half of the season, end up bottling the entire league and the title itself in that second half of the season? Well, I am a Brazilian, so I reckon I can chime in and give my fellow English speakers some further insight as to how Botafogo committed the biggest bottle job in all football. Let's start with some context here, friends. Botafogo de Futebol e Regatas, or just Botafogo, are a football club based in the Botafogo neighborhood region of Rio de Janeiro. Yeah, it's a whole neighborhood where the football team is based. They're well known for being the home to one of Brazil's most famous postcards, the Enseada de Botafogo with the Pão de Açúcar, or Sugarloaf Mountain for the English speakers out there, the Orca Hills, and Aterro do Flamengo in the background. They are one of the most well-known clubs in Brazil and one of the titans in Rio de Janeiro football along with Flamengo, Vasco da Gama, and Fluminense. However, their history with winning the Campeonato Brasileiro compared to their rivals is, let's just say, lackluster. They've only won the competition twice, in 1968 and 1995. But throughout the 2000s, their history has been marked by inconsistency with relegations in multiple seasons, with only a few state championships and Serie B titles to their name. Things would start changing completely for Botafogo in 2020, with a move that would set them up on the path for their 2023 campaign. But before we get into that, we've got to talk about politics. Look, I know, it's as painful for me as it probably is for you, but it's brief, and there is a point. In 2021, COVID-19 enthusiast Jair Bolsonaro and the rest of his cabinet passed Law 14,193/21, better known as the Sociedade Anônima do Futebol. It was passed in order to allow football teams to become for-profit corporate entities, owned by the club, but which could be portioned and sold to investors. Until that law came into effect, football clubs in Brazil were structured as non-profit civil associations who were exempted from taxes and could not be sold to investors. How did this happen, you ask?
Olá, eu gosto de dinheiro.
Botafogo would be the 4th club in Brazil to transition to the SAF model and the 2nd one to have foreign investment after fellow Carioca club Vasco da Gama, as American John Textor, owner and chairman of Eagle Football Holdings Limited, bought a 90% stake in the club in early 2022, adding it to his portfolio of football clubs in which he has an ownership stake. Billionaire, bored Americans investing money in teams of the sport that they barely understand. A tale that isn't that old, but it is getting quite repetitive at this point if I do say so myself. But when you consider the cost of getting an MLS expansion franchise, you can start to understand why these guys invest their money abroad. Anyways, Botafogo had just returned to Serie A after winning the 2021 Serie B, and the first thing that the now American-owned club did was fire the head coach who got him promoted in the first place. But fear not, Papa Textor had a replacement in mind, and that was none other than Portuguese head coach Luis Castro. Castro is best known for his stint in Ukrainian club Shakhtar Donetsk, where he brought them to the semifinals of the 2019-2020 Europa League and got them to the Champions League football following in the 2020-21 season prior to departing to Qatar, where he coached Al Duhail SC for a season before departing the club on a mutual agreement after winning the Emir Cup, which then led him to the Botafogo job. The 2022 season for Botafogo saw them achieve a respectable mid-table finish in 11th place that did qualify him for the Copa Sudamericana, South America's equivalent to the Europa League, and re-established the club as one that had the ability to stick around in Brazil's top flight. Paraguay keeper Gatito Fernandez's 9 clean sheets throughout the year, midfield stalwarts Gabriel Pires and Danilo Barbosa, along with Chiquinho Soares' 8 goal contributions since his arrival in August, were among some of the key contributors to Botafogo's 2022 season. Granted, the Botafogo fanbase was already getting impatient and screaming for a new manager after said 11th place finish and how they were eliminated in rather embarrassing fashion in the round of 16 of the Copa do Brasil by América Mineiro. Put a pin on this one because it's part of that whole foreshadowing thing you kids love in your stories. With 2022 in the rearview mirror, Botafogo would strengthen their side for the 2023 campaign by bringing in players such as defensive midfielder Marlon Freitas on a free transfer from Atlético Goianiense and midfielder Carlos Alberto from América Mineiro on loan just prior to the start of the Campeonato Carioca. They would also acquire right-winger Júnior Santos from Fortaleza for around £600,000, brought in Argentinian right-back Leonel de Placido on loan from Club Atlético Lanús, and some other depth players by early April in order to further prepare for the Campeonato Brasileiro campaign along with the Copa Sudamericana competition. But it came as a shock to everybody, Botafogo fans included, when Luis Castro led his side to their best ever Serie A start in the first 8 rounds with 7 wins and 1 loss. That run would eventually lead him to winning 15 of their first 19 games, with only a pair of draws and losses in that process. That put him at 47 points to wrap up the first half of the Brasileirão, 13 points ahead of Palmeiras and Grêmio, 15 ahead of Flamengo and Red Bull Bragantino, 16 ahead of Atlético Paranaense and eventual Copa Libertadores winners Fluminense. Braziliancy was the name of the game for Botafogo. During the first half of the Campeonato Brasileiro, 7 of their 15 wins were by a single goal, and their physical counter-attack style with a rock-solid defense under manager Luis Castro looked like a recipe for success. One of Botafogo's key contributors to that style of play and the run they made in the first half was keeper Lucas Perry, who was signed last season on a free transfer after an initial stint with São Paulo FC that saw him loaned out to Crystal Palace in Náutico. Perry took over the starting duties due to an injury to Gatito Fernandez earlier in January and would go on to manage 11 clean sheets in 19 games, including 6 of them in a row. Additionally, Chiquinho Soares continued his form from last season as he scored 13 goals this season during the first half. The first half run by Botafogo had just been about enough to seal the title long before the season ever ended. But even during that historic run, the stage was starting to set for what was to come. Luis Castro's run in the Brasileiro had managed to bring the hopes for the Glorioso to see their first title win since 1995. But in truth, the campaign hadn't started off well. I can explain. Let's go back to the start of the year. The Brazilian football calendar always starts with the state competitions, one for each of the 27 states that make up Brazil. But for Botafogo, the Carioca, Rio's state competition and the second biggest in the country, the first one being in São Paulo, had a less than stellar performance, as Botafogo ended in 5th place in the competition, missing out in the top 4 to compete for the Campeonato Carioca itself. Not even winning the Taça Rio would be enough for Luis Castro to escape criticism. An important trophy in the state's football history over the years, but one that has been reduced in recent times to being a consolation prize for the 5th through 8th place finished teams in the Carioca to compete over. And in Brazil, the state championships are taken seriously to where managers will get fired over poor performance during those tournaments. For Castro, he took responsibility for the team's struggles during the Carioca and propelled them to their run in the Brasileiro. Got them as far as the round of 16 in the Copa do Brasil before they were knocked out on penalty kicks by Atlético Paranaense, and then guided them through the group stages of the Copa Sudamericana. But at the end of June, Botafogo revealed that Luis Castro would be departing the club at the end of the month after accepting an offer from a foreign club. Eventually, it was revealed that the club in question was Saudi Pro League's Al Nassr FC. It is said that Cristiano Ronaldo was heavily involved in the process to bring in Luis Castro to the club. And in an additional interview with TNT Sports, he also revealed the criticism from Botafogo fans against him through most of his stint as a manager, in which it escalated at its highest during the Taça Rio final that they won, where fans were booing and had a banner that read "Fora Castro" being displayed, did play a factor in the manager's decision to leave prior to the end of his contract with the club. So for Botafogo, they now needed a new manager, and if one Portuguese was doing the job, then why not go for another one? Enter Bruno Lage. On July 8th, he was confirmed as the new manager, replacing caretaker Cláudio Caçapa, and his first game was a near scare against Santos, who'd gone up 2-0 early on and where a Herculean effort saw Botafogo rescue a 2-2 draw late against the team in a relegation battle. To Lage's credit, he did continue Botafogo's form through the remainder of the first half of the Brasileirão in July and August with another 4 wins and 5 draws, alongside seeing the Alvinegro Carioca into the Copa Sudamericana quarterfinals during the process, defeating Argentina's Clube Atlético Patronato in the knockout playoff round and Clube Guarani from Paraguay in the round of 16.
Isso aí eu tenho absolutamente a certeza que o Campeonato Brasileiro é do Botafogo.
Shoring up for the latter half of the campaign in order to secure the Brasileirão, Diego Costa was brought in from Wolves in August to add on to the team's offensive firepower. But Botafogo would see their first loss across all competitions since early June come at the hands of Argentinian club Defensa y Justicia in the second leg of the quarterfinals of the Copa Sudamericana on August 31st. It should be added here that Bruno Lage made the decision to play the reserve team in the knockout stages of the competition rather than putting in his starters. No big deal, you know. It's just a nice competition on a continental level, which Botafogo has never won. That happens to be the equivalent to the Europa League in South America, which guarantees the winner a Copa Libertadores group stage spot if you do win it. But it's fine. I'm sure he knows what he's doing.
Não, caralho! Perdão.
Oh, you have got to be f***ing me. That would set the scene for the month of September, as they began the month by meeting state rivals Flamengo in the Clássico da Rivalidade. But Flamengo had extra motivation for this game, and the Rubro-Negro avenged their loss earlier in the year 2-1 and put the first chink in the armor of Botafogo. The first time that any team had beaten them at home in the Campeonato Brasileiro this year. Atlético Mineiro was next on the schedule, and that's a team that had been lingering in the mid-table and were only starting to find their feet with manager Luis Felipe Scolari having taken over managing duties in late June. They'd been another team that Botafogo had beaten early on in the season, so, of course, Paulinho scores for Atlético Mineiro in the 81st minute and adds a second straight loss onto Botafogo's resume, their first time all season experiencing this. Not a stellar month so far, but look, Corinthians was next, and given their struggles throughout the calendar year, this should be a bounce-back game for the league leaders. But thanks to Fernando Marçal's lunging challenge in the 21st minute being reviewed by VAR, his yellow card turned into a straight red card, and in the second half, Corinthians finally managed to capitalize on it with a goal after Gio got his own rebound from a missed header onto the net. 3 straight losses, all of them won in a similar fashion to how Botafogo had managed to win many of their games in the past few months. They'd seen more draws and almost as many losses during Lage's stint than wins. It was almost like he was trying to speedrun his 2022-23 Premier League run with Wolves all over again. But next on the calendar, thankfully, was Goiás, a club that had been struggling all year long and who were in the relegation battle along the likes of Santos, América Mineiro, and Curitiba, which was one of Botafogo's few wins during the Bruno Lage stint.
NANI?!
18 shots, 6 shots on target, 60% possession, and somehow, some way, Botafogo only got a 1-1 draw against Goiás. At home. In fact, Goiás got the first goal of the match and forced them to rescue a draw. It was so embarrassing that Bruno Lage was called burro by Botafogo's own fans on his way out of the pitch.
Ouçam.
He coached 16 games in total for the club, 5 wins, 7 draws, 4 losses. He was fired a day later. Botafogo then turned to their U23 team head coach Lucio Flavio to take the job on an interim basis, with players at the club requesting for him to take the reins. So all they needed were just a few results to try and get the team out of this funk they found themselves in. At first, it seemed to have worked, as Botafogo managed to bounce back with a pair of wins over Fluminense and América Mineiro to make it a 9-point advantage over now second place Red Bull Bragantino. Yes, the Austrian energy drink merchants bought a team an hour north of the city of São Paulo and rebranded it over here too, just in case you didn't know that already. But a draw against a strong Atlético Paranaense side and a 1-0 loss against mid-table team Cuiabá that made me believe more and more that Football Manager actually does have some basis in reality. No, seriously, look at these stats. This is an FM and then some. The schedule makers and the football gods couldn't have asked for anything better, as it was second place Palmeiras who was coming to play Botafogo next at the Newton. Now, another win this season against the Campeonato Brasileiro defending champions should ideally quell Palmeiras' title hopes and ensure there's less competition for first place in the final stretch. And for the first half of the game, Botafogo got its act together and scored 3 goals within 15 minutes. Finally, they were on the cusp of getting a win that they can use to erase the woes of months past by continuing this performance in the second half to win it all. Okay, letting your defense basically get its pockets run and surrendering a goal of the tournament contender to a 17-year-old Endrick could be a backbreaker, but it's still 3-1. You're still under control.
A few minutes later.
In a possible 2-on-1 situation at the 71st minute, Adrielson decided to attempt to stop a run by Breno Lopes by sticking the leggy out onto the man himself, and after a VAR review, that challenge got a swift red card. Controversial? Yes. But look, it's totally fine. Tiquinho Suarez just drew a penalty kick minutes later, even with Palmeiras having the man advantage. All Botafogo has to do here is score this penalty kick and ice this game with a 4-1 dominant win.
What a save!
I'm sorry, how in the fuck? Gente, eu sou palmeirense e eu mesmo não tô acreditando nessa coisa. O que tá acontecendo aqui? Vocês já tinham esse título ganhado da primeira fase da temporada e estão fazendo essa merda por quê? Uma pipocada mesmo. Sorry about that. Let's get back on track, shall we? Oh hey, look, that 17-year-old phenom that ran Botafogo's pockets earlier? He somehow may have outdone his first goal in the 83rd minute, scoring the kind of goal that's going to go on every football compilation YouTuber's highlight reel of the kid prior to his Real Madrid arrival for the next year. And now Palmeiras has a chance to find at least a single point out of this game. Speaking of that point, Flaco Lopes finds the tying goal in question 5 minutes later. It's straight up just not a good night for you all. A continuous downward spiral, but listen, there's only a few minutes left.
Lance do jogão, Veiga pra bola, levantamento, fechou pra tocar Murilo! Gol!
So after laying a goose egg in the second half, the title race was very much alive and well for multiple teams in the Brasileiro. But the 4-3 loss wouldn't be the only thing to dominate the headlines over the next few days in Brazilian football. See, in the aftermath of the game, Brazilian channels caught up with new Botafogo owner John Textor, who was in town to watch this particular game, and they wanted to get his thoughts on what happened in this historic loss.
Did you know what the hardest thing for a rich white man to do is? Shut the f up.
But this is f***ing corruption. This has to change.
Yes, the Botafogo owner basically decided to complain that it wasn't a red card for Adrielson after all. They were being robbed. The head of the Brazilian Football Confederation, or CBF as it's better known, should resign first thing in the morning, that they could even fine and red card him, but that he'd still be there since this was his stadium. It made headlines in the sense that it showed the team owner displaying passion and challenging the status quo. Look, everyone and their mother in Brazil, or anyone who's paid close enough attention to Brazilian football, knows that the CBF has been a corrupt institution for decades. I'm not giving the rich American who's been buying multiple teams all over the globe a pass for stating the goddamn obvious. But focusing back on the football aspect of things here, Botafogo was leading this game 3-0 going into the second half. Even with Endrick's first goal and Adrielson's red card in the earlier portions of the second half, Botafogo still managed to get a penalty kick that could have iced the game entirely just a few minutes later. Chiquinho Soares decided to take that penalty kick with the same confidence as Courage the Cowardly Dog. And then, Botafogo surrendered 3 goals in 15 minutes.
This is corruption.
That's not corruption, that's just plain incompetence. And now, the title race isn't a cakewalk anymore. So by now, Botafogo should know that any and all points are essential, and when their next game is against the side fighting against relegation in Vasco da Gama, it was gut check time.
2 hours later.
They lost 1-0 after Vasco da Gama scored in their first shot of the whole game, and Botafogo only managed to get 2 shots on target the entire game. Things were about to go from bad to worse, as they would host Grêmio next, a team that had climbed up from Série B last season under club legend Renato Gaúcho's stewardship, and was now making a charge towards the top 4 places in the Brasileirão. To add on to the pressure, Botafogo would have to host Grêmio at Estádio São Januário, which is Vasco da Gama's stadium rather than their own. Because, well, Mexican Latin pop sensations RBD happened to have a concert in Rio de Janeiro that same night of the Grêmio game, at the Estádio Newton Santos, Botafogo Stadium. Now, I know you're asking yourselves, Fury, how is this relevant to anything? Besides the fact that RBD has quite a few bangers, and Botafogo has to host another team at a rival stadium, Estádio Newton Santos has artificial grass. Grêmio's top scorer doesn't play in artificial grass because it's hell on earth on his old ass knees. Vasco da Gama Stadium, on the other hand, well, let's just cut to the chase here. The game starts off well as Botafogo managed to get a 3-1 lead in this one by the early second half, with Diego Costa playing arguably his best game in a Botafogo kit thus far, only to have that undone in a matter of 20 or so minutes by known Uruguayan Hannibal Lecter cosplayer Luis Suarez, who scored a hat-trick on a game that he wouldn't even be playing if this game had been held at Botafogo Stadium. They lose 4-3, and now 3 teams are a point behind Botafogo, Grêmio being one of them. Botafogo then conceded a late goal against Red Bull Bragantino the following week for a 2-2 draw that finally knocked them off the first place berth they've held since week 3 of the Brasileirão season. That was the last straw, as Lúcio Flávio got fired and Botafogo does not sniff first place on the table for the rest of the year. Not even new manager Thiago Nunes is able to stop Botafogo from playing Pictionary with the amount of draws they get during his first month on the job, including a pair of draws against relegation side Santos,
I am not kidding,
and Curitiba, both games mired by Botafogo conceding goals in stoppage time, before losing in the final game of the season against Internacional to knock him into 5th place. That loss took him out of the top 4 spots in the Brasileiro and sent them into the qualifying matchups for the Copa Libertadores next year instead of being in the group stage of the competition outright, which could cost them a massive amount of money if they can't get through those qualifiers in February and March of next year. Diego Costa was not shy in an interview with Sport TV after their 0-0 draw against Cruzeiro to talk about Botafogo's horrendous run, citing that there was a lack of humility, that ego got in the way of putting together better results, and that the responsibility and fault for their form in the second half of the season was on the players rather than on the coaches and the front office. Considering his team had the mental fortitude of a wobbly tapioca in the last 19 games, I can see the valid reasoning for Costa to call out his own team like this. Although for a guy who just got there halfway through the year after his contract had expired with Wolverhampton Wanderers, those words would go further for Diego Costa if he had actually more goals and assists than yellow cards since his arrival at Botafogo. But overall, this is a bottling of such epic proportions that I wouldn't be surprised if Stan Kroenke ends up sending John Textor a bouquet of flowers for letting Arsenal off the hook from their own choke job in the Premier League campaign last year. Yeah, you're right, he'd be too cheap to buy a bouquet. Speaking of Textor, he got into hot water after his initial claims of corruption in the aftermath of the Palmeiras game, as the Brazilian Football Confederation president Edinaldo Rodrigues proceeded to sue him for slander. And this happened after they had initially hit him with a 30-day provisional suspension from his duties after that initial rant back in early November. John Textor's reaction to all of this, though,
I'm here to double down. That is a two-pack of ass. The are you talking about? Stink.
According to the Wall Street Journal, yes, even they had a report on this between Botafogo's bottling, Olympique Lyonnais fighting for its literal life in the relegation zone in Ligue 1, and Crystal Palace's usual mid-table woes. Textor is now pursuing a case against the CBF in Brazil's civil courts, alleging that the results of several Botafogo matches had been manipulated against this club while favoring other clubs, such as Palmeiras. Brazil's Superior Court of Sports Justice has already rejected Textor's request to replay 6 matches, which is why now Textor's trying to go above him. Seriously, for most of you who are watching this from the English-speaking world, if you think your refs are bad, trust me, it's not that much better in South America either. But at the same time, Textor's whole process behind it all, with independent studies being submitted and the actual attempt to get Brazil's civil courts involved when the Sports Justice Court's decision wasn't good enough for him, most likely means this whole thing is going to be in litigation for quite some time. And given how Brazil's entire legal system works,
I prefer really not to speak.
Well, at the very least, he's got enough Fubo TV money somewhere out there to pay for the lawsuit. It may not be the easiest thing for supporters of the Glorioso to do at the moment, but when you look at the overall season itself, Botafogo surprisingly achieved more than what was initially expected of them this season in the Brasileiro. Given their mid-table form last year, getting the 5th place and a chance to go into the Copa Libertadores outright if they can get past the preliminary matches is an improvement on what they did last season. But life goes on, and so does Botafogo, as there's only a few weeks in the aftermath of the Campeonato Brasileiro to move on to the new season, as the state championships will be restarting in mid-January. With Thiago Nunes set to have a full season as the team's manager, and owner John Textor promising to be more aggressive in bringing reinforcements to the club for the 2024 season, can they continue building on what they've done this past year?
Goddamn Americans.
Form is difficult to replicate, and it's unlikely that Botafogo will have either the blazing hot start that they had to start the Campeonato Brasileiro in the 2023 season, or the freezing cold finish that saw them fumble the trophy outright at the second half of the season. Not that it matters at this point, because for Botafogo supporters, no matter what silver linings one can try to find in their 2023 campaign, for them, 2023 will be the season full of what-if scenarios, as a nearly perfect run in the first half of the year was completely undone by a disastrous second half to the year, and it's going to leave a bitter taste too difficult to wash out of Botafogo fans' mouths for quite some time. Há coisas que só acontecem ao Botafogo. But never in a million years did I imagine that they would be the ones responsible for the biggest bottle job in all of world football. If anything, I had my money on it being those bastards over at Corinthians.